All right, thank you all for joining us to our webinar this morning. My name is Linda Verre. I'm the Formula Fund Program Coordinator. Here in the room, we have David Graff, our STIF Fund Coordinator, and Janelle Hull, who will be providing webinar support, and she's from Enviro Issues. So the purpose of this webinar, as you saw in the email correspondences that I sent out, is to give an updated overview of our guidance for completing the STIF Formula reports and additional information on the low-income impact mitigation reporting requirements. This webinar will be recorded for those who are not able to attend and will be posted on our webpage, so we'll notify all the transit providers when that recording is available online and when we post a copy of this presentation. What's going on? Okay.
So throughout the webinar, you'll be muted through GoToWebinar, but there are opportunities for you to type and have your questions answered. So if you look at your side panel for GoToWebinar, you'll see the questions box where you can type your questions to all of us, and we'll pause throughout the meeting to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, put them in the question box, and any additional comments, you can put them in the chat box.
All right, and these are the topics that will be covered in today's webinar. We're going to go over the schedule for those initial submittals and what will be the standard schedule. David will go through the OPTIS upgrades and provide a demonstration of the STIF periodic report, and both of us will discuss the common issues that we saw in the reports that were submitted on August 21st. I'll go over the low-income reporting area, and we'll have some resources and context for your reference. So the schedule that we're going to discuss are the initial submittals and the standard schedule, which you may be familiar with from our May and July grant management training webinars. For the initial submittals, those are the ones who are Cycle 1 and Cycle 2. November 28 was the submission for Cycle 1, and May 2019 was the submission for Cycle 2. So you may have received a notification from me that the second SPR is due for the Cycle 1 applicants on November 14th. So that's going to be for the reporting period of July 2019 to September 2019. And also the APR, the agency periodic report, will also be due on that date on November 14th. So reimbursement requests will be dependent on the APR being submitted, not the SPR. We do have backup documentation requirements for the SPR, and David will be going into those details later in our presentation. So again, those who applied in November, you'll be following the top chart. Cycle 2 applicants who submitted in May, your report won't be due until February 14, 2019. No, actually, that should be 2020, excuse us. So you have some time. What we need to do is make sure we enter your STIF plans in OPTIS so you can actually play around and figure out how to do the SPR. So we're actually working on that soon on the back end here in ODOT to have that information available. And we'll email you once that's your STIF plan is ready. So just be aware that you're not going to have to submit until February 14 of 2020. And David had mentioned this in previous presentations, but this is going to be our standard schedule going forward after we go through that first schedule in my previous slide. So you'll see we'll have due dates here in May, August, November, and February 14th. So those are going to be the first to the fourth quarter SPRs that will be due. So that's just for your reference. We'll notify you when that takes place. So just for now, we're going to be following that initial disbursement schedule and reporting schedule.
All right, so since the very first SPR that was submitted back in August, we've made a few little upgrades. We did notice that there were some things that didn't work exactly as we intended. So I'm going to highlight some of those changes that we've made, and then we'll actually get into the demonstration of how to submit an SPR. Okay, so we can see here we have help text now that pull information from the STIF plan into the SPR when you're going through the reporting. That helps remind you what you stated on your STIF plan. So we can see here in this highlighted text, value on STIF plan, $300,000. And so this is the other funds. And I'll highlight this in the demonstration where these are popping up, which is in the item details for those of you who are familiar. And so additionally, the outcome measures is another area where we have that help text. This particular example is a capital purchase, and so we can see there's no help text for the operating pieces or the student transportation pieces because they're not applicable to this given project. We do have the other section where it was a fill in the blank, and we're procuring one bus. And so that's kind of what's listed in the outcome measures. Contrast that to an operating project or task. We can see that the revenue miles, and this may be a little small on your screens, but it does have the help text down there of the revenue miles, it's 5,000. And then additionally, the information that we're looking for to be updated is all annotated by the help text. So for example, in this operating project task, the communications pieces won't apply. There's no help text guiding you for that. And in the student transportation pieces, these were not elected in the STIF plan. So we're not expecting an update on those items. Whoa, we just lost some of our viewing. Stand by for 1 second. I believe we're still broadcasting.
Yep.
Okay, so we just can't see anything for a moment. Stand by as our projector comes back online. Okay, we got our visuals back. So the items that we're going to be expecting on this particular project are going to be the ones that have that help text, the revenue miles, revenue hours, number of rides. And then if we go back to our capital project, we're not going to expect revenue miles or revenue hours because there's no help text guiding, because this particular example is that capital project, so they're not applicable. And then the other area where we have this help text popping up is in the program criteria. Again, I'll highlight all of these as we go through the SPR demonstration, but we can see here value on the STIF plan, fiscal year 0. So that would be the fiscal year 2019 on the current plans. And then in future editions, we'll see fiscal year 1, fiscal year 2 for the regular biennium. And those will pop up in future SPRs once we make those corrections to the STIF plan on the current submissions. So now I think we're going to switch over into...
And before we do, we have our first question.
Yes.
So thank you, question asker. For folks who are new, I think we have a couple of people who have joined us. You can ask questions by typing them into the question box, and we will pause throughout to answer those questions. So our first question is, if the fields are not highlighted, do you need to enter 0 in order for the form to continue, or only in the areas that have yellow reminders?
So the reminders on the SPR won't actually be highlighted in yellow. I've done that here to showcase them. When we go through the SPR, it'll just appear as text underneath. However, to answer your question, you do not need to enter a 0 when there is no help text. Blank is fine. Okay, so let's get into our SPR. Okay, so this is OPTIS, it's our system. So for the new applicants and people who have not previously received money through ODOT Rail and Public Transit, this is OPTIS. It's the Oregon Public Transit Information System. This is our web-based grant management system. So if you receive money from Rail and Public Transit, this is how we're going to record that and track that for you, and as well as for you to report to us. We have this lovely provider registration button here, which you can click, and then, oh, it timed out. Lovely. Try again. So here you can start the process all on your own at any point in time if you're a provider, and then we'll want to know if you'd like email notification or electronic response, e-response. That is something that we use to validate reports. You can click one of those two and hit next to start that process. We're not going to go through that process today, but I just wanted to show that for all the people who are unfamiliar with OPTIS, that it is available there. You can also contact your RTC and support analyst to help get you into the system if you're not familiar with the system. Today we're in the test system. So everything you see in the test system won't affect any of your current items. However, there are no features within the test system that are not currently in the production system. So everything you see here is as it would appear in the production system. So we have our test agency.
And we have one question while you're logging in. It's, do you have to register for both the test system and the live system?
No, only the production system. And then that will also grant you access to the training system as well. Thank you. So the test system is only for ODOT internal employees, and that's where we do any hot patches or fixes, and we see if that breaks the whole system without actually making those changes within the live system. So this is our back-end playground. And then the training system is something that is open to providers and other ODOT personnel, where they can go in and, again, not affect any of the live data. Okay, so I'm logged in as Zarazuza. This is our fictional person with our fictional agency. So on the left-hand side here, for people who are unfamiliar, these are all of your actions. This is the welcome screen here. There's open notices for grants when the grant solicitations come around. Today we're going to be focusing on creating documents, the SPR specifically, the STIF periodic report. So we'll go and click in our create documents. We have two types of documents for this particular type of provider. So it's create periodic report and create reimbursement request. So we're going to do the periodic report. There's two types. There's the APR, the agency periodic report, and then the SPR, the STIF plan report. We're doing an SPR this time. We'll hit next. And then here's the organization that the STIF plan is associated with. This would be the QE for those agencies out there. And the QE is the agency who will start the SPR or create it. So PTSPs cannot report on their SPR until it is created by the QE.
On that note, we have a question that is, am I correct to assume this training is targeted at the QE?
There will be things, we will be going through how to submit your SPR from start to finish. So there will be items that the PTSPs want to pay attention to. So we'll go into, again, how to create it, how to enter the expenditure information. So I would say it applies to both QEs and PTSPs. Mm-hmm. So this initial part is QE specific, however. And so we have 3 STIF plans in here. You should only see one. We've been doing a lot of testing. And so once we have our STIF plan that we're associated with, we'll click next. And then here's confirmation data that we have on our plan in our SPR. And so now the SPR has been created in the system. So we'll hit continue to start making sure that all of that information is in there. So we can see on the left-hand side here, this is our creation wizard. These are all the steps for the SPR as a whole. And then the projects are each their own separate document. So the SPR number is something that's automatically generated from OPTIS. It's not something that we can change. So we'll hit next. The information here is the document date is automatically generated by OPTIS for the current date. The document title is driven by the report quarter. You want to pick whichever quarter is the appropriate one for the given report. So the next one that is coming up that's due in November is going to be the July through September quarter that Cycle 1 applicants are reporting on. We'll hit next when we have that correct, and typically it will default to the appropriate quarter. There may be some circumstances in which you need to manually change it, so just double check to make sure it's the correct quarter before you hit next. Next step is the qualified entity contact. So we have our fictional contact here, and then we have our address for the QE. So hit next, and then we have our administrator for the contract here. That's going to be our QE, and we'll need to make some. Okay, next we have our attachments. This is where you'll attach things that apply to the SPR as a whole. So items like that would be the low income mitigation report, which Linda will talk about later on in this webinar. So you can do that by hitting browse and then finding the file on your computer and then uploading. And we'll hit next. Next we have the view projects. So this particular SPR has 6 projects, and we can actually click into these. I won't be doing that in this example. We will be going into these one by one. So we'll hit next, and now we have the operational STIF plan narrative. Again, this is for the SPR as a whole. So if there are certain things that affected all of the PTSPs in the region, you would put annotations here for that. Then we'll click finish, and we can start reporting on our SPR projects. Are there any questions from? All right,
Nope.
That's what I like to see at this moment in time. So here we see the report. We have our kind of high-level data. We have our QE contact information, and then we can see kind of the overarching budget and expenditure totals. And these will accumulate to date as more SPRs are submitted. This one is the first SPR under this plan. And here we can see all the different projects that we have, and we can actually click into this first project. And so this is where I'm going to show you how the QE will forward it to the PTSP. We won't actually be forwarding it, because then I'd have to log out of this account and then log into another account. But it's under the Actions button once we've clicked into the SPR project, and you can tell by the title up here, STIF Project Report. So under Actions, Forward, and then it'll say Forward to, and that's where we'll click down, and we can see that there's, oh, it's a poor example because there are no subrecipients to forward it to. Let's go down to one where it's a subrecipient. So now we can see that there is a subrecipient, Neighborhood Trolley. There's Fred Rogers, and then once we click this button, it will send this project to that subrecipient. So these will need to be done each. It's different for different people. Sorry, I'm getting some comments here. Send email to agent responsible for the document. If your web browser supports this, you'll want to check that. And this is not currently set up to do the in OPTIS email. So if I were to hit submit return, it will pop up my Outlook with a pre-drafted email. If you have Outlook, that's great. It's fully integrated. If you don't use Outlook, you'll need to send an email separately. So I'm not actually going to forward it because I would have to log out of this account and log back into another account. So once you've done that, you'll need to do that for each individual project, unfortunately, for the QEs. But that allows the different PTSPs, if you have multiple, to work on them simultaneously. That way we don't have to wait for one individual agency to finish their piece to move on to the next agency. Everybody can do their project concurrently. So we're going to get started with project 1 here. And we're going to see, again, we're at the STIF project report page. We have our PTSP, which also happens to be the QE. It's not the case for every project. Projects 5 and 6 do list a different PTSP. We have our contact information for that PTSP. And again, we have our budget and our expenditures for this individual project. We have our deliverables, and we also have our program criteria. And then we have our tasks. This particular project has 3 different tasks for a new route. The way we start reporting is we're going to go to the Maintain button here on our little sidebar. This sidebar is pretty standard for most of the features within OPTIS. Some of the individual items will be different based on if you're doing an APR versus an SPR versus a reimbursement request. However, the maintain, actions, and workflow categories are the main categories you'll be seeing across OPTIS. So we'll start at the top with number, and we'll notice that the steps here are the same order as the maintain. So this is kind of our wizard steps. We like to go in order, that way we get everything. So the number is something that we can't change. It's automatically generated in OPTIS to make sure each item is unique, so we can actually call back and go into this if we need to pause our SPR reporting, go and do something else, and then come back at a later time. This is that kind of document number, so we can go back and look at this. So we'll hit next. The project info, the document date is automatically generated for the day that you bring it up. And the document title is going to be the project name from the STIF plan. We'll hit next there. And then the provider contact, this would be the PTSP contact for this project. And again, that's from the STIF plan. Verify that that's correct. And we'll hit next. And then again, it's the address for that PTSP in the prior step. Go ahead and hit next on that. And now we have our record expenditures. So we can see here that there's 3 tasks for this particular project. And we have our description. We have our ALI code. For those of you who do federal reporting, you're familiar with the ALI. If you don't do federal reporting, the ALI stands for Activity Line Item. That's the federal account code that specifies what type of expenditure this is. So we can break that down a little bit. 11 is for capital bus, and then we can break that down a little bit further. 13 is for buses. 02 is the length of bus. And if we want to get real specific, the 13 is for a expansion bus. And then 30 is for operating, but that's a whole nother subject that we can look into at another point in time. Fuel type is only applicable to vehicle purchases. So task 1 is the vehicle, and it pulls that information in from the STIF plan. We'll notice it's blank on the other 2. Quantity is associated with a specific item for capital purchases. So in this example, we have 1 bus at $300,000 from the STIF plan. And this is operating, and when there's no specific item quantity, we just leave it as 1 for the total amount of operating. And here we see our project administration, again, quantity 1, total amount of operating for this project and task. And I'll show an example later of where these are different. So we'll hit record, and it brings up this line 1.1 where we can go in and look at things, and this drop down becomes available if you end up going, oh, hybrid gas was the type of vehicle we ended up purchasing instead of a hybrid diesel. You can make that change here. In the example, we're going to be keeping it the hybrid diesel, 1 quantity, and then the planned unit price comes up. If that's not what the actual unit price was at the time of purchase, you can update this number and put anything else in there. In our example, we're just going to assume it all came out the way we planned. So we'll go ahead and show what changing that looks like. And then we click record, and so you can see here that those values can be changed and updated. And once we've hit record and we have this second line, this new button over here, details, pops up, and we'll want to enter details for each line item that we have expenditures for. So we'll go ahead and hit the details, and we'll bring up the details menu. So we have the fuel type for capital purchases, and then additional information for any other capital purchases. So for vehicles, we'll want to know things like the make and the model. I should probably spell things correctly. The number of seats and ADA stations available. We'll go ahead and you should actually put what make and model and not just the words make, model, season. Okay. And then here's where we can see that help text. It's not highlighted as I mentioned, but it does show the value from the STIF plan. So in this example, we'll go ahead and put, we bought our bus, then we'll hit next. And now again, we can see there's no help text for revenue miles and revenue hours. Since it's a capital purchase, those don't apply. And we can see down here, one bus into service. So we'll put one bus. We'll go ahead and hit our next button. This report isn't an annual report, so we don't need to actually put anything in here. The annual measures are only applicable for fourth quarter reports, whether that's at the end of the first fiscal year or the second fiscal year, which is sometimes referred to as the 8th quarter. And now getting back to that question before, when we are asking about zeros on given items, we'll notice here that this does say value on STIF plan 0. One of the items that we're still working on with our developer is mandatory fields. Now the annual measures is mandatory for those end of the fiscal year pieces, but none of these are applicable to a capital purchase. However, they are a mandatory field. So if this were a fourth quarter report, we would need to put the 0 here. So it's kind of an area that we still need to look at and improve, but because this is not the fourth quarter report, we don't need to put anything in there. So we'll hit finish, and those are the details for our capital purchase. And now we'll go into the details for our operations piece.
Can we pause really quickly
on
capital purchases? So we have a question about the ALIs. Why do we need ALIs for state funds?
This is so that we can categorize and keep track when we do our reporting at the state level. So what we're doing is we're aggregating all of this so we can know what type of funds are being sent out the door, and we can do reporting to the legislature of when we send out our $100 million worth of STIF money, what is that being spent on? So we want to keep that same reporting structure because the FTA and federal sources have that pre-designed structure. We don't want to have a different structure between state and federal money, trying to make it as simple as possible. And I know I say that when I'm going through this giant report on the money. So I do understand a little bit of the irony there.
We have one more question on ALIs,
Mm-hmm.
but the ALIs will be in there already, correct?
Correct.
Great.
And so you'll notice that when I hit the record button, the ALI already popped up. So there's no manual entry on the provider. It's all there already.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. So we'll go ahead and hit details for our operations project. Since it's not a capital purchase, we can skip the item information. And we'll notice that there's no help text on the other funds. So this is 100% STIF funded. We'll go ahead and hit next on that. And now we have our help text here. So we'll say we have, 1,000 here, 250 here. These are all made up numbers. So if they look wacky and not representative of a real transportation agency, just know that they're made up. And there's no help text on any of the other items, so we're not going to worry that we're not looking for input on any of these other areas. Because again, this is an operations project, not a communications project, so number of impressions is not applicable. Go ahead and hit next. And again, if this were an annual measure, we have our help text here. Or if this were an annual report, we'd want update on these annual measures. So we would put those in here. Let's say we had 500. Just giving you the example. They're not required at this particular report. And then we'll do our project admin details. Again, item information only applicable to a capital purchase, so we'll hit next. No other help text, so this is STIF funding only. And then again, no help text here. And then down here is just administration. And so we'll just click finish because again, there's no annual measures that are relevant. So next we'll go to our project status. And now we have all of our wonderful deliverables. So in the first edition of the SPR, we didn't have that help text to remind providers what was on the STIF plan. And so we put that information in the deliverables. So here's a wonderful example of this quarterly measure for task 2 showing 5,000 revenue miles. Now, what the intent of this was is to remind people what was on the STIF plan so that a status update could be provided here. We're going to be revising these as we move forward with the SPR, so many of these should be going away and being reported in the details section where we have those outcome measures. There will still be deliverable measures for each task. For example, this one new bus in service, we'll want to know where you're at in that process. So in this example, we've purchased the bus, it's in service, we'll hit complete, and for every deliverable, there has to be a status note. That is a required field, and so we can put here bus in service. Again, spelling is not my strong suit, so bear with me as I go through that, and we'll put in progress for these because we need some update on these. And I will put in process. We'll use that as our updates in this example. And on the actual SPR, we will want a more detailed note than just in process. I'm doing this for the sake of brevity in the SPR example. So we'll hit next, and we'll go to the program criteria. Each one of these is mandatory, so you'll notice that there is a 0 value here. So it kind of depends on the field that we're looking at, whether or not a 0 or a blank is required. So it can be confusing. That's why we have our help text here to provide kind of that nudge or that hint of this is a field that you should update. And so our current guidance is to put the value there that matches the STIF plan if your project is being carried out in a manner consistent with your plan. If there are changes to how your project is being carried out from your plan, you can most certainly enter updated values. We'll just need the optional project narrative to be entered with that reason for the change, which happens to be the next step here, the optional project narrative.
I think we have a couple of questions before we move on to the narrative. We have one returning to the capital costs and ALIs. And that is, what if the length of the vehicle changes or other ALI items will need to change this with ODOT, or just put that in the optional notes?
So you do have the ability to update the ALI. You can click this find button here. And then let's say this is a 35-foot bus. If you happen to know the ALI for a 40-foot bus, you can go ahead and enter that one. And we can see here, there's that ALI, and you can click that, and that will update the ALI code.
Great. Now I have a second one that I may need clarification on, but
Okay.
I'll see if you understand it, David. Are those QTR to date information?
No. So not. Let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. So this would only be for the applicable quarter. So the report will automatically give you the to-date totals. So you'll only be reporting activity that transpired within the quarter. If that gets at that question, and whoever asked that question, if you need further clarification, please feel free to follow up on that.
Yep, we'll be taking questions throughout.
Yep.
We have two more for you.
Yes.
If an entity is changing the fuel type on the SPR from what was in the STIF plan, does that constitute approval by ODOT, or does the entity need approval separate from this?
That's a good question. Linda, did you have any comments on that?
No, I don't have a comment. I think we're going to need to get, well, I would think we would have, it it would be best for the provider, the QE, to email us of the change. And we may need to, because we can't change the STIF plan, that's as is. David is going to go later on in our demonstration about what's inconsistent and consistent. It can be changed in the SPR, and they could like document that and note it, but it would be helpful for us to like be flagged of that in advance so we can note that change and have an observation. It may not be a compliance finding, but it may be something that we want to have a heads up on. So when we do our review, we're aware of that change, and that's recorded.
Yes, and one of the areas of focus on STIF funding is the procurement of more fuel-efficient vehicles. And so, typically speaking, if you're moving to, in this example, if it's a hybrid diesel and you want to go to a regular diesel, that is going to be moving towards something that's a higher emissions vehicle. So that will be taken a little bit more critically under consideration than if you were going from a diesel to a hybrid diesel, which is reducing those emissions. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. But in any of these examples, when you're deviating from the STIF plan, we will note that as an inconsistency from the plan. So for example, moving from 1113.2, the 35-foot bus, to 1113.01, 40-foot bus, that would be an inconsistency with the plan. And we'll note that, and we'll be annotating that as we go through. So I do check that. It does get very specific when I start looking at items like that.
All right, thank you. A couple more questions.
Yes.
Just checking, we don't need to add revenue miles, et cetera, in the progress section, but in the detail section?
Yes, so the revenue miles, we're looking for them in, so I hit the details button, and under this third step, the outcome measures, that's where we're going to be looking for revenue miles and revenue hours and rides. These items pull onto a separate report that ODOT can pull on the back end, whereas the deliverables section, and I'll show where that is, we'll close this out, and then the project status, which is where the deliverables are. These do not pull similarly on the reporting, and so we're wanting to have the information put in the other screen, the details on the record expenditures, instead of in here. These were a placeholder for the first SPR because there was none of that prompting to say what you put on your STIF plan. So we're trying to make it a little bit easier for providers. So once we go in and update the STIF plans, many of these deliverables should go away, which I know makes some people happy.
And two more.
Yep.
How do we find the ALI numbers? Could you send out a sheet, or is there a website you can use to find them if we don't know them?
Yes. Yeah. And yes. So when you hit the find button, if you don't know the value, you can actually just hit, yeah, of course. We gotta put a space in there. Oh, come on. 2 spaces? What's the secret?
Show top level.
Show top level. There we go. So if you hit show top level, that brings up some of the ALI codes in here. And let me see if this also works. You can also do keyword searches if you know you're looking for operations. That will pull up some existing items. Now in the train, I believe there's several different, or sorry, the test server, there may be some differences in the ALIs as compared to the production. But you can do keyword searches and bring up those ALIs. And then if you have a question, you can always reach out to ODOT, either myself, your RTC, or your support analyst, if you have a question on, is this the appropriate ALI, or if there's something that could get more specifically at what you're trying to do.
Great. So folks can either search operations in that search field or reach out to an ODOT employee.
Yep.
Great. And then the final question.
Yes.
Would this be for the quarter only, right? Not total of the project?
Yes. So what you're putting here in your expenditures is only what your expenditures for the given quarter are. And that quarter, again, will be the prior 3 months in most circumstances. When your very first initial SPR for your agency, that will be a catch-up report. And that's something that we referenced in the May and July webinars. So I would go back and look at the schedules to get those reporting periods, and we can look at that at the end if we want to reference back to that.
Great, that's it for questions now.
Okay, so we're going to pick back up at the optional project narrative. Here's a tip for newer users. You don't have to hit next to go through all of the different screens. However, when you hit next, it does save. So if you've made a change, you do want to either hit save or next, but you can jump to a particular step. Just know that it doesn't save the screen at the step that you're leaving. So the optional project narrative here is where you'll put any deviations from the STIF plan. If you were to change the ALI, we'd want to know. If you're going to change the fuel type on a vehicle, we'd want to know. If you're changing your program criteria, we want to know. Basically, if anything is different from the plan, let us know why that's different. And once you've entered your text there, you hit next, and then that brings you to the attachments section. The attachments are for backup documentation that support the deliverables on your project as well as the expenditures. So we'll want to see some type of proof of expenditures similar to what is in the reimbursement requests. Now, I know there are no reimbursements under STIF from ODOT to QEs. It's a formula basis. We just send the money out the door. We're wanting to have that information so that ODOT can do its fiduciary duties and verify that the money is being spent appropriately for STIF purposes. So what that documentation is are things like invoices, any type of reports from your accounting software. If you happen to be using a Excel spreadsheet to kind of allocate different items across projects, those are the types of things that we're looking for. So we can go ahead and hit finish. Oh, and another additional note for attachments. So for project deliverables, if you have like a mobility management kind of outreach thing and your program was to create brochures, upon the completion of your project, we'll want to have some kind of proof of that deliverable, and that can also be attached here as well. So we'll go ahead and hit finish, and our first project is done. And now we can see the to-date items are coming up here, and we can see the current. And as we go forth and create new SPRs, these items will be in the previous, and then these will all update to whatever their new totals are based on the new information. So you're reporting the actuals for that given report period, which is the quarter, and then we will be tallying previous amounts to have that total to date for the STIF plan. So hopefully that gets a little bit more at those questions that we've been getting in. So now that this project has all of the details in there, and we can see all of the items that we've entered are being added in here, we can go ahead and hit complete step. And so it'll go from the prepared step to the authorized step. And so the person responsible for the next step, that will depend on the QE-PTSP relationship. I think what most QEs are doing is they're saying the PTSP will fill in this information, and then the QE will be the one who authorizes it. So we'll go ahead, and in this example, the QE is the PTSP. So we'll go ahead and hit submit, and then whoever the approver for the individual project is can go in and look at all of the report information, see if anything looks at place, and if everything's good, they can go in and hit the complete step. And this person needs an e-response keyword to make that authorization. if I got that right. Yay. And now, once that's submitted, we'll see workflow completed over here. And that means that this individual project is done. Yay. So we'll go ahead and close that down. Oh, here's our document is complete. Yay. And now we're looking back at the STIF plan report, the SPR. And if we hit this refresh button, we can come back down here, and project 2 we haven't started, it's incomplete. We have this little X button here, and project 1 is now complete, and we have this open book icon to show that that is complete. So if we get into our second project here, I'll start going through these a little bit faster because a lot of the information is largely the same. For example, the PTSP is still the QE in this example. Contact information is all the same. And then again, we have our budget information, our expenditures. A lot of it looks very similar. The main things that are changing are the tasks. So this is a passenger shelter. So again, to start reporting, we're going to hit maintain, and we're going to hit number to start at step 1 of the wizard. Number is something we can't change. It's automatically generated from OPTIS. We hit next. Again, document date it was created, date this SPR was created. Document title is the project title from the STIF plan. Verify that that hasn't changed. We'll hit next, move into our provider contact. This would be for the PTSP for that project. Go ahead and hit next. Provider address, so it's the address for the contact in the last step. Now we get to our record expenditures. So again, that line doesn't show up until we hit the record button. And now we have our record information in there. Again, we're not going to change the ALI. We are going to update the quantity. Say we only bought 3 of our shelters in the example, and the unit price was spot on because we have great forecasters. And now we can see that that total did update to 30,000 because we only have 3 at the 10,000 price. And now we can get into our details. Additional information. This is where you put information on your passenger shelter, whatever that type of information might be. If you had to break ground, or if it's whatever, how many seats, if it's a covered bench, or what information you want to put on your shelter there. And we'll go ahead and hit next. And so we can see here that there were local funds supporting this particular project. Go ahead and put our proportion of local funds. Then we'll hit next. And then again, these are only applicable to operating, no help text. We don't want to worry about that. In our example, we only have 3 shelters. And then we'll hit finish because this is not an annual report. Then we can go to our next screen. And it is in process, and we have 3 shelters. And again, we'll want a little bit more descriptive notes. We'll want to know if they've been purchased or if they've been installed, what step in the process those shelters are in. So we'll hit next, and then again, our program criteria, and in this example, they all happen to be 0 because an infrastructure change is hard to connect to these particular areas, and that's perfectly okay. And then our optional project narrative, put any changes or deviations, or if you want to just give us more information, you want to tell us the locations of where these particular shelters are being installed, that's wonderful information. Go ahead and enter that. And then in our attachments, that's where we'll want to see the invoices from the vendors for any capital purchases. If you did do the installation, we'll want to see those. And then once those are attached, you hit finish. And then all of that information populates here. We can now start to see our current and our to-date values. Hit process.
While we're on this screen, we have one question that is there a way to print the final submitted report?
There is no good way to do that, unfortunately. That is something we are working with our developer to create. And the reason for that is that each one of these project reports are their own document. So for example, with the APR, it does have that wonderful PDF. The APR is a single document, so it can pull all of that information. Because the SPR and the SPR projects are separate documents within OPTIS, it's a little trickier to get something into a concise report. But we are working on that, and that is in the latest work order that we have with our developer.
And another question on potential improvements. Is there a way for the system to allow PTSPs to authorize their own information before they return to the QE? If not currently, can this be considered for changes in the future?
That is something that the QE and PTSPs can discuss in their relationship. The complete step can be authorized by the PTSP if that's what your QE is allowing. So functionally, yes, that is possible. Whether or not that's the appropriate procedure for your PTSP will depend on your relationship with your QE.
Great, thank you.
So we went ahead and did the first completed step, and now we'll go ahead and authorize it with that eResponse keyword. And that is another note. If your QE is accepting the completion of individual projects at the PTSP level, some user at the PTSP level will need an eResponse keyword in order to do that. Okay, so workflow completed for our second project. So we'll go ahead and close that. There's our complete document. And again, if we refresh, we'll see that X turn into a book. So I'm going to start going through these a little bit faster because, again, a lot of it's some of that same information. And now I can start showing you a few other little tips and tricks.
One more question on the last one.
Yeah.
If we don't receive any money from the state for the STIF projects and the city pays for the shelters using city funds, then do we need to do this report? And if no, then do I still need to complete the quarterly STIF report at all?
You will need to complete the quarterly STIF report. You can put 0 or you can leave it blank for individual expenditure task line items. One of the additional upgrades we made, and I'll go ahead and show this little trick here. So we're in the STIF project report. If you want to scroll down and go directly into this piece here, you can click into it and it'll bring you to that wizard step. In the first edition, you had to have some number put here. It wouldn't, or some positive number. It wouldn't accept 0 as an applicable answer or as an appropriate input. It does allow that now, so we can put 0 and then we can click details and go into our other funds and then put our local funds in there. So that would be the recommended option if it was paid from local funds, because it's an identified project on the STIF plan that is moving forward. So that would be the recommended method to report on that.
And with the optional project narrative with that context.
Yes.
Great.
So I kind of sped through that piece a little bit quickly. And if you didn't work on it, so in this example, we have our planning project. Let's say we didn't do anything with this and you don't want to report 0. You can delete line items by hitting this little blurry trash can icon. You'll see the check mark pop up and then you hit save and then that will remove that line item. So if no activity whatsoever has been conducted on a given task or project, you can just move on. And so we'll say that this is not started. Again, it's not started, and we'll actually provide some decent status notes here. We'll say project starts January 2020. We'll go ahead and hit next. And our program criteria, these are mandatory fields, so we will need to put something in there. And we'll go ahead and hit finish since the other 2 fields aren't really being utilized. And now let's see if it yells at me for any reason. So now, because we didn't put a 0 in there, we are getting this integrity check warning. Warnings are okay. It's when you have a integrity check failure that you need to go back in and correct something. The warning is more so a notice for ODOT to go in and look at something. And so we can see here that we can still submit it. It's not causing any issues. And the reason it's giving that warning is because nothing's being entered. And if that's appropriate for your project, that's perfectly okay, because it won't stop us from going in and submitting it. And see, it still goes to that workflow completed step. It's not going to prevent us from submitting it.
We have a question on that program criteria section.
For those reporting in cycle 1, in the first report, should we use program criteria percentages from fiscal year 20 because we are reporting on July through September 2020? Our program criteria percentages currently refer to the STIF plan in fiscal year 19.
Yes, so what you'll want to do is use those fiscal year 2020 percentages from your STIF plan. The ones that are currently popping up in the help text are the 2019 percentages, but we're going to go in and update that as quickly as possible so that it will show all three of those. So it will be on the help text, it will show up as FY0 for 2019, give that percentage, FY1, which will be fiscal year 2020, give that percentage, FY2, give the percentage for fiscal year 2021, if I've got all those dates correct and not jumbled.
And one more program criteria question. Do we need to complete the program criteria section if we do not have current expenditures? You say it's mandatory, but no error comes up if not completed.
Well, let's test that in our next example. So our next example is our reserves. These are things that, you know, if it's a program reserve, you're not planning on spending it unless you have to. So I know it will error out if we don't put something in the status notes. So we can actually go to Actions, Check Integrity, and that will pop up anything that needs to be submitted before you hit the actual Submit button. So here we can see Integrity Check Failed. So when you have the failure, it does prevent you from submitting it. And it says Deliverable Status Notes Required. We can click Project Status, and that will bring us exactly to that step that we need to update. So because these are program reserves, not started, perfectly acceptable. These are just reserves. And we'll go ahead and hit Finish. That'll save the reserves. And let's go ahead and hit Complete Step and see if that changes anything. So again, we have that warning because we didn't put any expenditures in there. It's just a warning, doesn't prevent us from submitting. So to answer the question, yes, you can submit without program criteria if there are no expenditures.
Great.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close that. Yes, we completed that document. That was the reserves. Might refresh so we can see those X's turn into little books.
Nice.
Okay, so now we can get in. So we can see here that the provider name, the PTSP, here is the same as the QE. Here it's a different provider. That happens a lot. I'm filling it out as the QE, which is possible, but probably not recommended. You'll want your PTSPs to submit that information for the sake of brevity and not having the login of this provider and login to the other provider. I'm just doing that myself. So again, you'll want to put, we can go into the maintain, and we can skip directly to that record expenditures piece. You don't have to start at the top. I recommend starting at the top until you are more familiar with the process, but you have the opportunity to click directly on the things that you want to report on. Okay, so we've got other fuel. They've got we want to know the make, model, seats, and then ADA stations for this trolley. If there are any other funds. And our outcome measure, 1 trolley. go ahead and hit finish. Go into next. We'll mark this complete, and I do want to highlight here there's only one deliverable for this particular project, and we're marking it complete. We'll say trolley in service. Probably need to spell things correctly. And close enough. And then these are all 0. And we'll go ahead and hit finish. And so now we can see our little green check mark for it being completed. And when all of the deliverables are completed, that puts this entire project into a complete status. And I'll show you what that looks like on the report once we complete the workflow here. Okay, so workflow completed. And now when we hit refresh on our STIF plan report, we can see here that this purple closed book signifies that project 5 is completed, closed. That one's all the way done. There's nothing else to report. And we should only be marking a deliverable as complete when there's absolutely nothing else to report with that given project. So for this example, it was a capital purchase. The purchase is done. Nothing else to report on that. What this will mean is in a future SPR, project 5 will not even show up. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then skip to 6. So that way you don't have to worry about reporting on that. So we'll get into our last project. It's a carry forward project. And so again, the only thing we really need to put is in our status notes. It's a carry forward. Finish. So depending on how much you've done on your projects, the SPR can be kind of fast, or it can be kind of slow as you report all of your revenue hours and revenue miles for all the operations projects. So we'll go ahead and hit complete step here. Again, we don't have recorded expenditures, perfectly acceptable for this project. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and close that. And I did want to draw the attention to where it says future. We have that check mark here to illustrate that that's a carry forward and something that isn't planning on being expensed in the 1921 biennium. So we'll refresh. We don't have any X's. We have closed books and open books. So that means that the SPR is ready to be submitted. So this would be at the QE level. The QE says everything's good. All the projects are complete, whether that's completed by the QE or the PTSP. We can go in and hit complete step. So it looks similar to completing the individual project. And then we're going to authorize this. And then when you're submitting that final authorization, you need to check this box here, certifying that this is complete to the best of my knowledge. And then we'll hit submit. And now the overall SPR is at workflow completed, and it has been submitted to ODOT for review. So I know that was a lot of information coming at you really fast. What are the outstanding questions that we have?
We just got one in, and we might get a few more. So the first one is, will ODOT correct the carry forward fields on the SPR for the first plan submitters? For example, reserves planned for the 19 through 21 biennium are checked with future carryover on the SPR.
Yep, we'll be looking into that as we go through and update some of the other plan information. For example, those program criteria percentages throughout the different years. That's another area where we can look at updating that STIF plan submitted information.
And we don't currently have any more questions, but we'll keep bringing them in.
Okay.
Jump back to the PowerPoint.
Yep, and close out of this stuff. All right.
Great. Thanks, David. That was very thorough.
Yay.
All right, I'm going to go over some common issues. David may go over one or two of these slides as well. So these common issues were from the first SPR that was due on August 21st, 2019 from the Cycle 1 applicants. So we identified the top 5 issues we saw and then a few other issues we wanted to speak about as well. So the top issue we saw was the project criteria percentages, and David was pretty thorough in his demonstrations about this, but in the reports that we received, the projects had different percentages entered in their SPR compared to their STIF plan, and as David recommended earlier, we would like the reporting for each program criterion to reflect what was entered in the STIF plan and to just enter those same percentages, unless there was a variance. So if there was a project that changed and your percentages are different, then by all means update those criterions that are applicable and provide that optional project narrative. So you see here in our example, this is the OPTIS upgrade that David went over. So this wasn't available for those first SPRs, but now it is. You'll see that there's that wizard, what's it called, text wizard?
Yeah, help text.
Help text. So help text is available, so you'll see what was entered in the STIF plan, and you can duplicate that information and have that readily available. So you'll see these 4 circles is where the STIF plan had some numbers. If there's changes, as I mentioned, go ahead and update those changes, and then in that optional project narrative in step 8, you can provide some context to why there was those changes. So that was number 1 issue.
So the number 2 issue that we saw was the lack of backup documentation. So if you're making progress on your STIF plan project, get some tongue twisters there, we'll want to see some sort of backup documentation. So we can see here, this particular example, there's $850 of STIF funds being utilized. So we're going to want to have some level of verification that that money was spent. And we can see in the example that they did submit an invoice for that $850. That's awesome. That's the type of stuff we want to see. In the July grant management training, there was a document called the Request for Reimbursement Supporting Documents Checklist that was sent out. Those are the same guidelines that we're wanting providers to follow for SPR submissions. So again, even though the document says reimbursement documents, there are no real reimbursements for the SPR. The money goes out as a formula payment ahead of time. What we're wanting is some justification and for the numbers that you're putting in there. And because we're already having these processes elsewhere for reporting to ODOT, we just want to mirror those same processes.
Okay, great. I'm going to move to the third common issue, which was the project status notes. And here we noted that the notes included information on when the project started, but there was a lack of progress details. And the action that we identified when we reached out to the QE is to address this by updating the status notes or the optional project narrative. This is a good example of information in the status notes which is what we were looking for, just more details. Here we didn't need the annual measures, but I'm just going to overlook that. For the quarterly information, there was more information about the revenue miles, what quarter it applied to, if there was no activity. So as David mentioned earlier in his demonstration, we would like these status notes to have more details, more information. And you can also use your project narrative field as well, which is that step 8 here.
Mm-hmm. And those will be being updated moving forward because we have a lot of the help text in there now. So a lot of these ones where we have the revenue hours and revenue miles should be disappearing from this section to make this section a little bit easier and less cumbersome.
Okay, great. And the 4th common issue was project deliverables. So here, project deliverables should only be marked complete if there's nothing else to report in the lifetime of the project. And when the project is complete, we want a proof of final deliverables. So this is like repeat information from the demonstration. here in the example, I believe this was a provider who had this all initially as complete, and we had to notify them that the project doesn't look like it's complete, so we would like you to change this back to in process. And that's that.
For this slide, I think this question is about this slide. Are the examples in the status notes acceptable? Perhaps it was the previous slide.
Yeah, I think this was an example where we wanted more information in the status notes, and this might actually be still an outstanding SPR that we're waiting for a resubmission. So in the project 3, these status notes are amazing, and we'd like providers to copy this format and provide more details here. So this is actually an example of a status note that needed more information.
Got it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So number 3, good. Number 4, not so good.
We got a thank you.
Room for improvement.
Yeah.
All right, and the 5th common issue was the outcome measures. So here we had projects that had outcome measures entered which were not applicable to the project. Metrics reported should only be applicable to STIF funding, and the purpose of this SPR is for STIF-specific data. So here's an example of a miscellaneous bus station equipment, and they included annual measures, which, as David mentioned, this is only needed at that 4th quarter report that's due. And also, this wasn't included in their STIF plan. So this wasn't any measures that we needed information on. So as that help text is now available in OPTIS, you'll see what was included in your STIF plan and what you need to enter. And I think this issue can be resolved now.
Yeah, and a lot of the issues that we're seeing should be resolved via the use of that help text. So use that as your guide.
One clarification.
Sure.
David previously said that we don't need to report revenue miles in the status notes if we report in the outcome section. Can you clarify?
Can you repeat that one more time? I just want to make sure I have the
David
fields.
previously said that we need to report revenue miles in the status notes if we report in the outcome section.
Yes,
We don't need.
yeah, so under the details of the expenditure in the outcome measures section of the SPR, I know that's a mouthful trying to figure out where that is. That is the area in which we're going to be looking for the revenue miles and those types of measures. So if we back up one, this is the status notes / deliverables section. This is not the area that we're going to be looking for those revenue miles and revenue hours in future SPRs. In the very first one, we didn't have that help text, so we wanted to make things slightly easier for providers by saying, hey, here are the items that you had mentioned on your SPR. But these should be being revised in the near future as we get to that, to make these go away entire. Well, I say these as the deliverables, but there will still be deliverables to report on. The ones that line up directly with outcome measures, for example, the revenue miles, the revenue hours, those particular types of ones will be going away. So depending on the type of project and the associated measures with that project will determine which deliverables stay and go. Sorry, I can't be more specific on that.
So if you do report your revenue miles in the outcome section, you do not need to report them in your status notes.
Correct.
Great.
Sorry for any confusion on that.
Any others, or shall I?
Nope. Okay, great. So a few other issues we saw was the lack of vehicle information and lack of other funds and match information from the STIF plan. So David went over this earlier, but for the status notes here, we asked for the make, model, length of vehicle, seats, ADA stations, and the field type. So he went over those actual fields of where that's going to be entered. But this is what we flagged in that first SPR that was due. And also lack of other funds and match information. If the STIF plan had other funds listed, we noted when a provider didn't include that information. So this is where, in the circle over here, where we inform the provider, hey, you had this information in your STIF plan, please enter it now. But as he went over the demonstration and the upgrades to OPTIS, you'll have that help text to let you know what information was included in the STIF plan. So that should help alleviate this issue.
Now everybody's favorite topic, inconsistent with the STIF plan versus compliance issues. So this is kind of one of those tricky roads to walk down of, is it an inconsistency or is it a compliance issue? And that kind of is determined on a case-by-case basis. Being inconsistent with the STIF plan isn't necessarily a compliance finding. It could just be an observation that ODOT is making that there's a change from the STIF plan to what has actually occurred. The things that we're looking for are changes in ALIs, fuel types, and changes in project scope. The example that we have here up on the screen is a change in ALI that was made on a STIF plan. So we can see on the plan it was for project administration, and then on the report it was changed to salary and services. This is an item I need to follow up with. It's inconsistent with the STIF plan, but I'll need to work with the provider here in this circumstance to get more context on why this change is occurring, because the initial project was scoped as project administration. We can see there for more efficient tracking and managing of fiscal processes within the grant. So that implies that it's more of staff internal at the organization that are working on the reporting, whereas in the SPR, it looks like it was reporting driver and dispatcher salary. So there's a bit of there is an inconsistency there, and then with the additional context, we can see if that arises to a level of non-compliance or not. So it really depends on the scope of the project and the intent of how the STIF plan was entered. So this is a process that needs some collaboration from both sides. And there's some implications of having a continued inconsistency in the SPR. And what those implications are is that it puts your SPR and future STIF plans under higher scrutiny. The reason for that is that the OTC rejection criteria, so for newer people, OTC is the Oregon Transportation Commission. They provide the oversight and approval for all the STIF plans. One of the rejection criteria that's laid out in the OARs is whether a qualified entity has failed to expend STIF formula funds in a manner that substantially complied with a prior approved STIF plan. It's a mouthful. Basically boils down to, did you spend the money the way you said you were going to? And so that's why we're being careful and looking at these changes in ALIs, changes in scopes, and we really want you to use that narrative section when there are those changes to try and justify, okay, this is the reason it happened. And if it makes sense, then it could just be an inconsistency. But if it seems like something else is going on, then it could be a compliance finding.